It was a little bit disorientating, wasn't it, for some newscasters listening to us this morning?
Yeah, because for those who don't know, Newscast goes out on BBC Radio 5 Live super early in the morning. And because Adam is off gallivanting somewhere wonderful still, we miss you, Adam, please come back. Rachel Burden and Rick Edwards, who are the BBC Radio 5 Live breakfast presenters, were hosting Newscast last night, which was then played out on 5 Live this morning.
And that meant that one or two people who were listening to 5 Live at the crack of dawn, and presumably up early for a particular reason to get to a particular place, had a bit of a brain scramble. David Sandford tweeted, "Totally confused me. I put the radio on at 4:30 in the morning, heard you," this was in response to a Rachel tweet, "thought my clock was wrong, got up, had a shower, went downstairs for breakfast, put the radio back on, and it was the Money programme, that's Wake Up to Money, that's on at 5 o'clock in the morning on 5 Live. Lost a couple of hours sleep and I am now disorientated. Never take things for granted." David, apologies. I was on with Rick and Rachel last night, and to think that you were listening to us lot blabbering away at 20 to 5 in the morning, and you probably thought it was, I don't know, whatever time you set your alarm for.
Hang on though, Chris, because I am not sure that David is the only one that's had a bit of a clock issue this morning. I think that's probably fair to say. Have a little listen to this moment on the Today programme.
It is so baked into her, as I put it a second ago, her political identity. That was the pitch. That was the central dividing line. Excuse the alarm. I've got Therese Coffee syndrome here. There's an alarm going off in the background as I chat on the Today programme. It's contagious. It stopped. Thank goodness for that.
Contagious Therese Coffee syndrome.
So let me paint a picture
Please do.
of what we call in our house the room with the junk. There's nothing cryptic about that name. So it's the spot where I have my little microphone to do my little radio things in the morning. It is full of junk, bags of old clothes, my daughter's bike, a stepladder, and all the rest of it. Anyway, I'm in mid-flow, and this beeping of a watch, but not my watch, starts going off. And I think, oh dear, where is it? I can't see it. Obviously, I'm on the radio, I'm talking, so I just have to keep going.
And you did, admirably.
I did keep going. But then I thought, if I stop talking, it just makes it more obvious. And I know how long it goes for, because it's the same watch that I wear every day, but not the same actual watch, the same make of watch. It goes for 20 seconds, which in radio terms is like forever.
And of course, the reference to Therese Coffey was because this happened to the Deputy Prime Minister when her alarm went off on the radio
a couple of days ago. And it had happened a couple of months ago with Therese Coffey on a different radio station with Dr. Dre playing. So it's happened for Therese Coffey twice. It's happened for me once.
Well,
and I still don't know where the flipping watch is because, of course, by the time I came off the radio, it had stopped. And I don't know where it is. I can't find it.
There is only one thing I have to say. Set your alarm. It's time for Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
I'm Chris Mason, the BBC's political editor, here in the Westminster Newscast hub.
And I'm Alex Forsyth, political correspondent, also in the Newscast renamed hub. Chris, I quite like that.
So let's talk about all things. Well, we should say what time. We should say it's like 6 o'clock, shouldn't we?
We should say that just because we know, Chris, the pace of things now.
That this gets overtaken. But we have, the biggest names you could ask for in the world of political PR, if you like. In Sir Craig Oliver, who used to work for David Cameron, and Alistair Campbell, who used to work for Tony Blair. And, well, there's quite a bit to talk about, gents.
What do you mean?
Well, let's talk about for me, the one question to ask both of you is, put yourself back in that building that you both used to work in, and the phone rings from someone like Alex or me. I mean, what do you say?
Do you answer? Is the first
do you pick up the
question.
phone? I mean, how do you spin yourself out of this, I suppose, is the thought.
Well, it depends. I mean, it depends what's going on, but I don't know is the answer, because I think that what's happened is we've gone through the whole kind of Johnson mess, and I just think the Conservative Party learnt nothing about why it ended as it did. And so they've gone for somebody who is so clearly out of a depth, can't do the job. So I suspect what's happening there, they're all probably telling her things aren't as bad as they seem. They're all probably giving her the bits of the news that she wants to hear. And meanwhile, I think Kwarteng as well strikes me as somebody...
Chancellor.
He just strikes me as somebody who... It's like he's on a different planet. So, look, the honest answer is I don't know what to do. Because I think they are in such a mess. And it seems to me that everything they do is making it worse. they're not. They don't. There isn't a clear strategy. They've got this. It was interesting today. James cleverly said, our plan is to grow the economy. That's not a plan. That's an objective.
But what are the other options available to them now? Because I think, isn't the part of the point of this that whichever way Liz Truss and her team turn at this point, it is so unpalatable, either politically or economically? Because if she rows back on tax cuts, then of course political credibility is a real problem, because that was such a central plank of her whole leadership pitch. She's already apparently ruled out spending cuts, so it leaves her with a kind of budgetary black hole. So, I mean, even if is there a common strategy
look,
that could get her out of this?
It's not quite checkmate for her, but it's getting pretty close. There is a sort of situation in chess which is called zugzwang, which is basically any move.
It's great.
I know, it's a good word, isn't it? But it basically means that
You haven't got anal beads going.
no anal beads, but I have got zugzwang. And zugzwang means that any move you make causes a huge problem. And that, I think, is absolutely the situation they're in. They are in a situation now where they've got to deal with the world it is, and you're going to have to take some serious pain in order to have the possibility, and underline the possibility of surviving.
We're talking about comms because you've got me and Craig here, but it really isn't about the comms. This is what are they actually going to do as a government, as a Prime Minister, as a Chancellor, as a Cabinet? What are they going to do? And I get the sense they're digging themselves ever deeper into a hole because they're not confronting the reality early. I saw George Osborne today saying, we all know what they're going to do. They're going to do some massive screeching U-turn at some point. For God's sake, get on with it. Now, if they are, I would definitely agree with that. Do it now. Do it quickly. So they said, our mistake was not to prepare the ground. Well, that is such a basic error to make. They know that they've got people. One of the first things Kwarteng does, he goes in, they sack Tom Scholar. They say to people who've been
Tom Scholar was the Permanent Secretary.
They say, we don't need you. But they are exactly the sort of people who would have been saying, look, if we do that, this is going to happen. And the comms people would have been saying, look, if you do that, have we thought through the answer to that? And I was watching Kwarteng being interviewed by Faisal Islam. I mean, you can't have a Chancellor in a situation like this whose first word is and whose third word is They have not thought through the answers to obvious questions.
Well, Kwasi Kwarteng was asked some of those questions by Faisal Islam, as you mentioned, because he's in Washington.
Anybody thought I'd set that up?
I know, it was almost like you planned it. Have you got your own podcast? Have you got your own podcast?
I do have my own podcast.
How many minutes was that? Did we have podcast bingo at the beginning? When were you going to mention it?
That was restraint that I hadn't anticipated.
I know, but now
at least 5 minutes.
You've realised that you've ruined the brilliant segue. It was so smooth before Alistair.
I'm sorry.
No, but we were saying Kwasi Kwarteng was interviewed by Faisal Islam, BBC's economics editor in Washington today. We can have a little listen to what he said because he was asked about the possibility of changing his position on some of these things.
Are you going to U-turn on big measures, further big measures in your mini budget, as many seem to be speculating on right now?
Our position hasn't changed. I will come up with the medium-term fiscal plan on the 31st of October, as I said earlier in the week, and there'll be more detail there.
And you'll be Chancellor and Liz Truss will be Prime Minister this time next month?
Absolutely 100%. I'm not going anywhere.
That line, "I'm not going anywhere," can always be interpreted both ways, can't it? It's kind of an unfortunate thing to say. Craig, on the specifics of the strategy from the Chancellor today, it strikes me he couldn't really say anything else. He's thousands of miles away. He can't sort of preempt a U-turn without actually announcing it, and it's the Prime Minister, I guess, is ultimately making the decision. So and if he hadn't done the interview, having announced that he would, people would have panicked. So
try and imagine yourself into his situation. Look, he's painted himself into a bit of a corner, but he is sitting in Washington knowing that in Westminster the WhatsApp groups are going absolutely wild, and
Totally.
you two will have both seen this today. But the gossip is, and I don't know whether it will come to pass or not, that he is likely to be sacked by the weekend and replaced by Sajid Javid. That is one piece of gossip that is doing the rounds today. It may or may not be true. But knowing that when you're the Chancellor and you have to go and face the media and you have to give an answer is an impossible situation to put somebody in. And I think that tension between the two of them at the moment is going to be incredibly tough. There will literally be people in number 10 at the moment and people who are close to Liz Truss saying the only way out of this is to fire the person that you live in the same street as, who is considered your political soulmate,
very close
literally lives in the same street in Greenwich and in the same street in Downing Street, with that you're very close to. The only way out of this is to fire this. And politics is a terrible game. You really discover who your friends are when push comes to shove and your survival is up against somebody else.
But I'll tell you what, I think that she came in as Prime Minister and been elected by the Tory party, probably the most important appointment you make is who's your Chancellor of the Exchequer. That was the case for Tony Blair with Gordon Brown. It was the case for David Cameron with George Osborne. And I think as she does that, bearing in mind, I heard John Curtis on the radio earlier today, the polling guy, and he was saying that uniquely, for somebody particularly so young in her premiership, she is not liked and she is not seen as competent. That is toxic. And when you suddenly say, I'm going to get rid of the guy that I appointed to do what I want to do on the economy because I've become this sort of mad libertarian, right out on the right of the Conservative Party, and you fire him and then pretend that because you're bringing a new face, something's going to be better, I think it'll make it even worse for her. If they do get rid of her, which I think they will eventually, by the way, but if they do get rid of her, the one thing they are going to have to avoid, and at all costs, is putting it back to the Tory party members, because they will then, I suspect, do something as crazy. And so I think I think if you're in a crisis, you have to think about where is this going to end? What is the end point of this? Now, I think the end point is she's toast. I think she's gone. I think once you've been defined so strongly, so early, so negatively, and it's gone into people's pockets, their mortgages, their pensions, the big picture economy and the small picture economy, I don't think you can come back from it.
It's like double Alistair Bingo with the podcast and Brexit. You know.
We're going to Burnley.
It's worth.
We haven't done the name of the podcast yet, Chris.
No, that was. Shall we?
What's it called, Alistair?
I don't like doing that naked promotion. I really don't.
You're so sad. It is worth just talking about the options, of course, that Liz Truss may look at, because one of the ideas that's been kicking around today, Chris, and you would have heard it a lot, is this idea about, is there an option to row back on elements of the mini budget? And the one that's been thrown around is corporation tax. So we know that what they've said is they're not going to proceed. They're not going to proceed with a rise in corporation tax. Might they, is the question now, to kind of like salvage some economic credibility.
Just to pick up that point before... Oh, we're going to hear
because of Liz Truss, this came up yesterday during Prime Minister's questions, so it's worth reminding ourselves of the position the Prime Minister was pretty clear on, as of Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday.
What we are doing is simply not putting up corporation tax. It's not a tax cut. We're just not raising corporation tax. And I feel it would be wrong in a time when we are trying to attract investment into our country, at a time of global economic slowdown, to be raising taxes.
Just spending the whole afternoon over the road talking to MPs at every level of the Conservative Party, people in government and outside, is that, I mean, one idea is something around corporation tax, but kind of every single idea seems to be in open discussion as to what you do.
And look, Alistair and I will both have been in situations where basically you're on the run and you're looking for a position to actually draw a line and stop. I think the danger that they've got in considering is almost like you sort of cheese pair your way to a point where you're constantly changing, you're constantly moving. What they need is some kind of definitive move, which is a big, bold end and draws a line. I think just saying we're going to U-turn on corporation tax isn't enough. It'll be, what's the next thing? What are you going to do on fracking? What are you going to do on planning? What's going to happen with the uprating of benefits? What's going to happen when the OBR comes up and says, really, your numbers don't add up? So they need some moment where they can really, really draw a line. I'm not sure I know where that is, but that's why they're thinking of getting rid of the Chancellor.
I know, Chris, it's your guys' job to go around talking to MPs. I've been amazed. This is me, Alistair Campbell, Tory party bogey person, Nespa Chris.
We love you.
I've been getting messages from Tory MPs.
Who?
Well, I'm not going to say because they'll stop sending me the messages.
I know.
But, you know, I don't know if you've got the New European on the bingo, but I've written my column this week about it. They're saying the most extraordinary things. I had an exchange with one the other day who actually said, you know, carry on calling out this, then he said a bad word, show. And I said, what are you going to do? He said, we're going to keep defeating her until she's gone. That's a Tory MP talking to me. Never mind you, there's, you know, the BBC.
30 odd days in to her premiership.
I know.
That's the astonishing thing, isn't
even
it?
Brian Clough got 44 at Leeds, Chris.
What about Labour in this? Because, I mean, what do you think Keir Starmer should be doing at the moment? Should he be keeping quiet, keeping out of it, sort of letting the Conservative Party go down the route they're going down, which is obviously an awful lot of turmoil, to put it mildly?
No, I don't think so. I think there's two things to say about that. I think Labour should be attacking. You should always be attacking your opponents when they're weak, and Labour should be doing that. But I do think that one of the reasons has been this sense of a feeling of kind of movement towards Labour and towards Keir is because actually even though the Tories were already in quite a lot of turmoil at Labour's conference, I thought Keir had a real sense of confidence. And I thought that particularly the green energy thing, I thought he had a sense of there's a different agenda coming here. I want to see more of that agenda. And I think actually Keir should be doing more of the kind of, the forward policy stuff. You have not got it in the bag because you've got the government imploding, but things can change. Let's just say that they do get rid of Truss. Let's just say that somehow they do manage to install a Sunak or things will change.
And Labour are coming from miles behind.
So first of all, they've got a psephological mountain to climb. But I also think that it is worth constantly reminding people of the volatility of politics. A year ago, Boris Johnson, people were talking about what was he going to do in his third term. Yeah. Seriously. A month later, we started hearing about Partygate, and less than a year, he was gone. It is an incredibly volatile situation. Now, I think that actually it is almost impossible for Liz Truss to come back for this, but it is vaguely possible that the Conservative Party can revive in another way.
And the accusation...
How?
Sorry.
Well, I think that you start with, and basically persuading people that you can have another person in charge. The difficulty with that, I think the pressure for a general election becomes massive. I think that, you start getting the palace involved then saying, well, can you credibly have a fourth leader in a one government term? And that all sorts of problems like that. But I do think that where the Conservative MPs are getting to is last week at the conference, they were saying it would be insane to change. I think now you're getting more and more people saying, maybe we just need to get somebody in to steady the ship and limit the damage.
That's right.
I was another Tory MP that I was actually with the other day, who was asked by one of his constituents, be honest with me, what is better for the country now, a Labour government led by Keir Starmer or this Conservative government led by Liz Truss? And he said, I honestly can't answer that. That's a Tory MP.
Is it the problem with Conservative MPs, the point you alluded to, that they've gone through this series of leaders over the course of, them being in power, and what it's left is a party that's kind of ideologically fractured, and that's what we're seeing playing out, because you have got so many different groupings within the Conservative Party right now, and you mentioned some of the other hills, fracking, planning, all of these things which we know are potential flashpoints for the party. So do you get to the point where, the point you were making, Chris, I think, when after 12 years in power, you kind of come to a point where
you sort of show your age.
I think, you show your age, but I think every time you change leader, there is a whole group of senior people who basically end up disaffected and on the back benches. And you're right, the Conservative Party is now in a situation where it's got multiple groups like that. And those people don't want to lie down and they do want to criticise. And frankly, they want to be vindicated and say, look, we just spent 8 weeks of a Conservative leadership conference talking about fantasy economics. And within 7 weeks, you blew the whole thing up. So that is a massive issue. I do think a lot of people are starting to talk about maybe they do need to just experience a time where you've learned the lesson and then you come together. The Labour Party...
Do you mean a time in opposition?
Well, yes. The Labour Party, let's not forget, not that long ago was trying to persuade us that Jeremy Corbyn should be leader of the country, which was frankly a completely insane situation. And most people realised it. They've come to their senses. There's a sensible guy and people in charge who are saying, let's not frighten the horses. Maybe the Conservative Party needs to go through an experience like that.
I just want to put the brief point to you, Alistair, about this idea, and it has been an accusation, even a criticism of Keir Starmer, that it isn't enough just to have a Tory party that's imploding. You need to offer a viable alternative. The point you made, and I spend a lot of my time going around the country talking to voters, and you do still hear this idea about, well, I'd vote for Labour because I don't like the Conservatives. But is that enough? I mean, a positive vote. Like, you still hear the accusation, I don't know enough about Keir Starmer, who he is, what he believes in, what he stands for. Do you agree with that? Do you think it's a fair criticism?
I think it's overdone, because this thing, for example, about Keir being boring, I don't think Keir's boring. I think he's actually quite an interesting guy. And I also agree with Craig and I were talking outside that, boring might be quite good.
Boring might be sellable.
Quite like the idea.
Keir Starmer said in the Today programme, and he said, "Are you boring?" He said, "Well, I don't think I'd make a better Prime Minister if I'd done a skydive or something like that."
No, exactly.
It's kind of personal.
But he's serious. He's hardworking. He's got real values. He's honest. He's credible. There is a killer instinct in Keir that people don't always see, and I think he didn't go heavy on her yesterday, but there was a sense that he was looking at somebody and thinking, she cannot do this job. I've got this. And I think that's... Confidence is incredibly important.
Greg?
I spoke to somebody had lunch with somebody very senior in the Labour Party just to have a chat about what was going on. Trying to get a job. But what they said, two things that I thought were very interesting. One was the importance of that moment at the conference, that they genuinely were worried when they sang the national anthem. Nobody had ever sung the national anthem ever at a Labour conference.
They handed the words out. The words
apparently, and they handed the words out. But even under Tony Blair, they didn't sing the national anthem.
We used to sing it before we left the hotel, just to be a Tony together.
And then the other thing that I thought was interesting,
bathroom mirror.
The other thing I thought was interesting was that they were painfully aware that one key moment in the Tory leadership thing was when Rishi Sunak really attacked Liz Truss. People didn't like a dominating male pushing somebody down. And so I think that the tone of that, they are thinking this through, and it's quite interesting.
So we'll get together again, I presume. Hopefully you'll come back. But can we push you for some predictions? And then when you do come back, we can test you how right you were.
He'll be Prime Minister at Christmas.
Honestly, I don't know. I don't think you can say it is perfectly possible that it will not be Liz Truss.
And that's the crux of this, isn't it, Alison? Right now, I was saying this on the 6 o'clock news just now. We're 30 odd days in, and nobody disputes the idea that she could be gone and gone soon.
It's extraordinary.
And the thing, if I had to put my life on it, I think she'd be gone. I think she'd be gone
by
then.
Christmas.
Yeah, and if she's and I actually wouldn't rule out a sort of. I mean, you will know better than I do. I wouldn't rule out a kind of coronation of Sunak.
Well, I think what's interesting is at Conservative Conference, I sort of raised the possibility that, you know, Rishi Sunak's vindicated. He comes in and, you know, you just say, oh, look, all's forgiven. You were right. Let's do that. And a lot of Conservative MPs were saying, sorry, we just don't like him. The party is not going to unite behind him. And I was quite surprised by that. Now, maybe they will have changed because of the events are so bad. And basically MPs are starting to think, like, is it possible to save my seat? But certainly last week, there were a lot of people saying Rishi Sunak is not the answer. And the problem they may find themselves in is there's no figure that they can all unite behind, like Michael Howard in 2000 and whenever it was. They just don't
We
have
loved
that
having
figure.
him as an opponent.
So the next prediction then is when's the next general election?
I think the answer to that is honestly you can't say. It could be very soon. It could be go the distance. My feeling is it's not going to go the distance.
So next spring potentially.
Potentially, but I don't think it's
Depends
going
on
to go
her
the
fate,
distance.
I suppose, isn't it?
No, look, if she goes, I think it'll be very, very hard for the Tories to do the same trick again. I think the country is sick to death of them. I think they're sick to death of hearing about politics the whole time. So I think if she goes, the election will be sooner. If she survives, it will be later. But I don't think we'll go the full term.
Okay, well we'll get you back.
Definitely.
It was
See
great.
how accurate your predictions
It was great
were.
to be on The Rest is Politics.
No, this is Newscast.
Oh, is
Craig.
it?
This is Newscast. Oh, Craig. Where is Rory Stewart?
Alistair Craig, thank you so much for being here. So we can now talk to Mariana Spring. Hello, Mariana. Thank you for
Hello.
being here. Lovely to see you on Newscast. So I understand that Americast, which is sister program, sister
Yeah.
pod, I think it's probably fair
definitely
to say.
sister.
Yeah, I like it. Has been
Close
doing
family
this
relative.
incredible project, which I'm a little bit fascinated by, which is about creating social media accounts to try and see some of the junk that gets thrown around. Can you just explain it? Because I'm not very tech savvy.
And
and
for
I need
those,
the basics. I
and
need
for
the
those
kind of-
listening rather than watching, Mariana has an improbable number of mobile phones in her hand.
Which is something to do with the project, right?
Yeah.
Let's just be clear. You
It
don't
is.
just walk
I
around
don't
with
just
multiple
wander
mobile
around.
phones.
No. I have got several old phones. I actually have 5, but here I only have 4 for anyone watching, in a Blue Peter-esque fashion. And basically what I've done is create 5 different characters. They're based on data from a think tank in the US. And they have views and opinions and hobbies and interests and names. They are called Brittany, Gabriella, Michael, Emma and Larry, who's sadly not with us. They have different, they fall into different political categories. So Brittany is our populist right voter. Gabriella is our apolitical voter. Larry is our faith and flag voter. So Larry and Brittany sit on the right. Gabriella's bang in the middle. And then on the left, we have progressive left Emma and we have democratic mainstay Michael. And that's a lot to take in for people who are like, what on earth is she talking about?
So we've got the midterm elections coming up, haven't we, in America? That's the kind of political context. And I guess what you're trying to work out is what each of them are seeing and what they're seeing that overlaps with each other and then what they're seeing that nobody else sees.
Absolutely that. So they've got social media profiles across the 5 main sites. So that's YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook and Twitter. And what I'm seeing is what they're recommended, how they're targeted with political ads, for example, how the algorithms work and just, you know, what rabbit holes or what avenues they're led down. We say rabbit holes often when people go into conspiracies, but actually can just be lots of the same thing. And we're also just seeing when something big happens, how their feeds react in different ways. We've seen that around speeches, for example, that candidates have given, or that the president has given, or that different politicians are giving. We've seen that around big events like the hurricane that was happening, Hurricane Ian in the US, and the impact of that and the different people caught up in it. So it's fascinating to just get a chance to look at these subjective social media worlds that people inhabit. And this is the only way of doing it. And that's why I have so many phones.
It is fascinating. I mean, I said junk at the beginning. By junk, I meant some of the disinformation, because that's got to be a big part of this, right? Is how people are accessing information which is not true. And are you seeing that play in as big stories happen? Do you know what I mean? As something breaks in the media, are you seeing versions of that story be pumped through to certain accounts?
It's really interesting because disinformation is one of the things I, as my many people, are really on the lookout for. After the riots that happened at the Capitol in the US, it's something that there's been a lot of focus on, including from the social media sites who've made all kinds of commitments to tackle that kind of content, harmful falsehoods and so on. What we've really noticed is that our populist right voter in particular has been recommended on some sites, pages that continue to push the idea that the election in 2020 was rigged, that it was fraudulent. And the same hashtags and themes come up again and again whenever something new happens, because when something new happens, it's all part of the conspiracy. It's all part of the plan.
I suppose the thought I have, Mariano, is how much are your 5 voters, Brittany et al., living in echo chambers, worlds that are entirely different from the others? And to what extent is there overlap?
They're very much, I'd say, on the whole, inhabiting these echo chambers. It's interesting, I've spoken quite a lot about populist right Brittany, but progressive left Emma, she's also had some quite extreme stuff. It's tended towards, she has stuff about climate and abortion and racism, but a lot of the stuff that she's looking at can use violent rhetoric. It's often, name and shame, target individuals and stuff like that. Less overtly conspiratorial. But she's absolutely in an echo chamber in the same way that populist Brittany is. What's most interesting, and one of our favourites on Americast, is Gabriella, because she's our apolitical voter. And we really wanted to see who targets her, because she's not interested in politics at all. The main thing that she's liked that's a political issue is stuff around the cost of living. She wants to know how to save money on her groceries. She wants to know lots about her local area. She's from Miami. And we've really noticed in the past couple of weeks in particular that she's starting to get those on the right targeting her feed much more and capitalising on drawing on this issue of cost of living and blaming Joe Biden and the current government for that problem and saying that's why you need to vote for the Republicans.
It's totally fascinating. I'm guessing what you're going to do is kind of collate this information and then use it to make an assessment about how social media works in a way that you wouldn't see through your own eyes. I mean, it's amazing. Please tell us more about it. I mean, I think Americast is obviously, this is a huge project for them and following it all through. So I guess people can hear more about it on Americast. But
they can.
I would be fascinated to hear more as well, like, down the line as you keep this going, particularly as we go up to the US midterms.
Well, we've got the midterms coming up. We're going to be, there's going to be a lot coming out, kind of summing up everything I've just said about these undercover voters, for the website, for the podcast, obviously, for Americast, for stuff you can watch on the telly.
And let me guess, we can find Americast on BBC Sounds.
You're right.
Okay, so that's it from us. Tomorrow, James Cook, the BBC Scotland editor, is presenting Newscast, and he will be speaking to Hugh Bonneville.
Oh.
I know, so big name on Newscast tomorrow. Going to be a good one. He's going to be talking about his Ukraine campaigning and the BBC's centenary, so definitely worth checking out BBC Sounds. But from us, that's it. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Newscast from the BBC.